Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Lou Kemp.
Hi there, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I am so excited to chat all about your writing and reading habits and all of the things.
I'm excited about it too.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your books?
All right. The main genre is magical realism, which is a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of everything else, but it's not with elves and knights and so forth. But it's closer to fantasy than it is to anything else. And it's set in the steampunk era in the 1800s. And it's basically an adventure that continues book after book after book. And the three main protagonists, stars of the show, are Celwyn, he's an immortal magician, and Professor Xiau Kang, he's an automat. And an automat is a mechanical man who looks like a man usually. And then Bartholomew, who is almost 7 foot tall, widower from the Sudan in Africa. And they're close friends, and from the book one is how they met, everything happened. They encounter a lot of supernatural entities that are either friendly or not friendly. And on book two, they begin an association with Captain Nemo and the Nautilus. And right now I'm editing book 6.
That is so exciting. Yeah, thank you for sharing about that. I love magical realism as a genre. I think it's so fascinating. How did you end up there? Because I saw on your website you started in horror, right?
I started as a horror writer, and a lot of everything has a mystery element to it, including mine. And it got to the point where I wasn't happy writing horror, but I wasn't happy writing mystery either. I did do quite a few mystery credits or whatever. And the Mystery Writers of America puts out an annual anthology. I've been in it several times. A couple of times I was the only unagented author that made it in. And I also sold to other anthologies, but I've always wanted to do a series. And as I started ebbing away from mystery, I went into more of the magical realism. And that would be about 10 years ago, the Charlene Harris edited one of the Mystery Writers of America anthologies called Crimes by Moonlight. And my story in that is what is the birth of Celwyn and everybody else.
Oh.
Celwyn, the immortal magician. And then he appeared, and every time I appeared in another anthology, he appeared evolving into what he is now.
That is so cool. Was it a case of you wanting to bring this character back and just explore the world more, or did the character kind of just keep popping up as you were already writing?
I had ideas for him as it went along about things I wanted him to do. And then it just morphed into what it is now. And everything, if you've not heard the argument about outlining versus writing by the seat of your pants called pinsters, I have no clue what's going to happen till it happens. And I'm one of those people that let the characters drive everything. And I occasionally will make notes and make sure to do this, make sure to do that. But the plot isn't there until it gets there. And so when Selwyn's doing something, it's really, to me, helps the spontaneity of it. And it helps, it makes it unpredictable enough to where I've had a lot of readers and editors say, what's good about it, among other things that they liked, was that they were expecting one thing and something else happened. And I like to keep it that way.
Oh my gosh, I am the same exact way in my writing. I love when people come on and say it, and because there's so much to talk about with that part of it, that spontaneity and those moments of discovery. Do you have any of those kind of moments that you'd like to share?
Not a lot, because not that I can share them if I could think of them, for example. But what I would say is Selwyn's character is evolving as the books evolve. So are the others. I'm adding in other secondary characters, and the cause and effect are what's causing to have his character change. He's becoming mellower as he becomes more friends with the people he's friends with, but he still has explosive, magical things that happen that are uncontrollable. But I guess to answer your question best, it's change is constant.
Cool.
Everything's
Yeah. So, how did you start writing?
I started writing when I was probably about 10 years old because I thought it was fun. And when I was about 15, I got to thinking it's a lot of fun and I got to figure it out. And by the time I was 20, I was selling short stories to literary magazines. They don't pay, but they look great on a credit because back then, I'm very old, back then, you had to mail in everything. There wasn't email. And you had to see who's going to take you. And it was basically researching who you want to be published by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still so important for young writers to get into those and to be submitting. I mean, even just that submission process teaches you a lot.
If you don't have credits, you can at least look like you know what you're doing. And you don't get credits till you start at the bottom and go up. There are occasionally places that will take an unknown person, but usually, unless you're a savant or something, your writing shows you're new, and it goes from there. And I was going to say, speaking of that, with my publisher for Horsemen, I have a great editor right now. His name is Joseph Mistretta, and he has quietly, just because of his patience, caused me to be a better writer over the last year or so. Mostly because whenever he has to clean up so much, I feel so embarrassed. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. And it's turned out very well. I think he's great.
Oh, it's so important to have a good editor and someone that you can trust and bounce things off of. Yeah. Okay, but wait, this makes me want to know what happened next. What did the rest of your path to publication look like after you started getting those first credits?
Okay. In my 20s, I was in anthologies here and there. I got into one in the Barnes and Noble anthology about shorts. They were like 500 word, like what's called flash fiction right now. And I saw in that something I really admired, and I could tell it was a professional writer, not somebody new. And he or she was using a fake name. And it was pure magical realism. I can't even, you don't have the time for me to tell you what it's about as much as when I saw how that was done, how the in and out of reality went in and out of that short story, that was just perfect. It just set me off on that path. And like I say, everything has evolved. I left the Horror Writers of America probably in early 2000. But I also started going to the every year in June, the Santa Barbara Writers Conference in Santa Barbara. And the first 2 or 3 years, I sat through different workshops till I found the one that matched me as best it could, which was the horror, fantasy, speculative writing type of a workshop. And in 1994 or 1996, I remember which, I won the award for that year. And the story was called The Black and the Ivory. And basically, it's told from a first person point of view, from a crazy person's point of view, who was murdering people. And it got people. So I would just say at that point, I started going uphill in everything I was doing. I had an agent for a short time in the 2010 range. I'm going to say around here in New York, good agent. But even then, I was doing a lot of cross-genre work where I'd have at least 2 or 3 genres in what I was doing. And he kept getting the response, can't you make it just romance or can't you just make it mystery? We don't like cross-genre work. And this came from everybody we tried to sell it to. Nowadays, it's a good thing. So I think it's great. And I just added in a couple new genres in book 6. We're going to see how that turns out.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so good to see this shift for sure with the genres. Because otherwise I feel like it can be limiting trying to put yourself into this one box.
Predictable. Yeah. So
well, that is so cool. Thank you for sharing. So I also saw in your bio that you that you were previously an engineer. How did that influence the way that you write in any way?
It does in the sense of how I organize things, as far as justifying and organizing it. And both Bartholomew and Xiau Kang have an engineering type background. And it's not a secret that in book 2 and book 3, it starts their quest to build an airplane in the 1860s for Captain Nemo. Captain Nemo is interesting. And so they call it the flying machine. And so I use a lot of engineering background into my engineering had nothing to do with planes, but I can fake it and look up the rest and make it work. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So wait, that also sounds like something that would be pretty research heavy too, trying to add that in also.
to a point, but I also make it fit the situation. Like, for instance, their first prototype didn't have brakes. And here's Bartholomew's landing it, and he's spinning around to make it stop. And I have Celwyn saying, I hope there's brakes on the next version of this. That kind of a thing. It's where I bring it into what the story's going to do usually. And I try to keep the tense and the horrific elements and the dramatic elements on a keel going up, but I also insert humor to bring it down, let everybody breathe a second before it goes up again. So that's how the arc goes in what I try for. But the flying machine was destroyed in book 3, and I'm not going to give away the spoiler on the plot on that. And in book 2 and book 3, Celwyn's immortal half-brother, another magician, comes into the picture as being highly untrustworthy, but useful. And a lot of the drama centers around him, and it's still continuing in book 6. So I can't, people that haven't read the books, I don't want to hurt their surprise on this.
That's all really interesting though. Yeah, thank you. And I do always say we can do light spoilers, but I try to avoid them a little bit so that way people can still have those surprising moments and get that excitement, but get just a taste, you know. I now want to read these books to learn more about this flying machine.
Well, Nemo's going to get what he wants eventually. We'll see. Okay.
So were these books always meant to be a series? You said earlier
Yes.
that you wanted to write one, but oh, okay.
When I was doing the Mystery Writers of America anthology stories, they were standalone, but they were the basis of a series. And the whole time I'm doing it, I'm thinking series. I'm thinking of what I'm going to do. And in 2018, which is the Anne Perry edited anthology, that was where you could truly see that where it's heading. I'll put it that way.
Okay, yeah. That's really interesting. I get a lot of people on the show who say that they wrote the first book and then realized there was more or got in farther or whatever. So I think I think that's an interesting kind of dichotomy there that you're more on the pantser side of things, but
Totally.
still have this plan.
And also the 2018 anthology, which was called Odd Partners, the theme on it was that there has to be opposite that are having to be partners. And Professor Kang's brother hires Celwyn to kidnap Professor Kang. Once they're at sea, come to find out the evil one is the brother. And so Celwyn trades loyalties, and the story goes on from there. And the whole short story that's in the anthology is the first 15 pages of book 1 of the series.
Really
It was a basis. I just turned it into the basis.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, what are some things that you do to get yourself in the right headspace for writing?
It has to be really good atmospheric music.
Okay.
And
Is that with words or without words?
Atmospheric would be totally no words.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
There is an exception because I like to use the theme from the Phantom of the Opera. And that Phantom of the Opera has operatic singing going on in it. But the music is loud and it's very atmospheric. When I say that, it's very, here's a chorus and here's me singing. You don't hear that. It's smoothly, it's more of a mood than anything else. And I also have to have fountain pens with black ink and fine tip on the fountain pen. And other than that, I'm ready to go.
So do you handwrite?
Yes, I handwrite with a fountain pen, first draft, everything. And then once I get it into the computer, which is immediately right after, then everything is done by the PC.
So how do you make that jump to the computer? Do you have to type it in, or is there a way that you scan it? Or
Well, here's a little tidbit. Okay. It's really hard on your hands to type all that in. I have voice activated software, and the current version I have is one of the newer Dragon versions. And the real big tip is never make the tutorial that bases its work on when you have a cold, because all of your words that are coming through your nose will not be said right by Dragon until you change everything all over again. And even then, Dragon and I are not friends. I've been trying, but it's better on the whole than typing it.
okay, yeah. I'm just interested because I love typing on a typewriter for certain things, and it's so hard to have to try and write it all out like that and then type it in a whole other time.
Also, I think there's a Microsoft Word feature that you can have it speak it'll verbalize your document for you. And if you had Dragon going on and had them as your tutor, that's what I'm going to try next, is have Word speak the whole thing and have Dragon do it. Dragon has issues, in my opinion, with punctuation. And I don't mind fixing that, but every time I say the word Celwyn, it wants to SELL space when it doesn't, no matter how many times I teach it, it just keeps on doing it. So anyway.
Find and replace is my best friend for for things like that, or when I misspell my own characters' names, which happens many times.
Control find is our friend too. Yeah.
That's really cool. I love hearing about people's like rituals for that and what sort of things you need. Do you have a favorite thing about writing or the writing process?
I like the idea of getting your head into what you're doing. You get everything, all your senses, your head, your memory, anything that's going on extraneously out of your face, and you can dive into it. And I just love to do what I'm doing. I hate editing, but I understand it because I need it. But I'm like on the 20th editing of book 6 right now, because this was written over a period of a year and a half when I was moving and a bunch of things were going on, to where it was disjointed. The main bones of it were there, but the writing was very minimal and very much of a placeholder in most places. And just the whole thing was not smoothly done to get to the point of putting it into the computer. It's not, I have to clean the whole thing up several times over. So it's not good.
Yeah. But I wish you luck with that. I know editing is always a little bit brutal. Were there any characters that were harder for you to write than others while you were working on this?
I would not say hard to write as much as me needing to flesh them out and recognizing it, because I skipped over where they were not fleshed out and needed to be later on when they were more on stage, and they were blanks to me and blanks to the reader if they got to that stage. So I would say getting into the head of all the main characters is easy enough, but I need to ramp up some of them more and tweak them up a little bit.
Okay. How do you know? Okay, so this is a totally different question, but like, I'm just curious. How do you know when your first draft is done? Do you go based off of pages or word count? Word count's got to be harder handwriting. Or do you just kind of know naturally where the story ends and then flesh out from there?
The story itself will end of what part of it I'm telling, because mine is one super long story. It's not like a mystery. By the time you find out who did it, you're done, book's over. In this case, in book 1, without giving too much of a spoiler, Celwyn didn't die, but things got really bad where they were at. And so it's obviously a great place to stop the story. In book 2, he's mortally wounded. And so into book 3 starts with them trying to save him. So there's always a stopping point that I recognize. But what's interesting is book 4 is a normal amount of information and size. Book 5 is much larger than the rest of them because it had to be to account for all of the tendrils that came together into one spot. And so it's a lot bigger and it's harder to account for it, but it had to be that size. There's no other place to break it up.
Yeah.
Book 6 will be back to normal size around 300 to 400 pages.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's cool hearing everyone's process. All right, so when this episode is airing, I am sure it will still not be November. But as we're recording this, we are deep into the NaNoWriMo type season. Have you ever done any sort of challenges like that?
I thought it was wonderful. I've heard people that loved it or went crazy over it or stressed to the point where they couldn't do it. I've heard all those things, and most of it on the whole is very, very productively a good thing, especially for people that need a kick in the pants to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be in a good mood to do it, and I don't want anyone pushing me into it, having to do it. But I can see the point of it, and I really think it's a really good thing for them because they really are happy they did it.
Mm-hmm. I completely get that though. The pressure around it. I'm doing soft NaNoWriMo this year, where I'm just trying to finish the book that I've already been writing, but it's not the full challenge because I've been there, done that. Too stressful.
Yeah, I know it's stressful for some, and other ones love the stress, and they got so proud of themselves when they're done. And if you get online and you look at it and you see, I did 1,000 words today, oh, good for you. You know, I'm happy you did, but are you happy you did them that way? Next question. In my case, yes, I can do 1,000 words a day, but how much cleanup do I need if I was just blasting through it? That'd be the next question. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
There are people that write perfectly good first drafts that are just ready to go. I'm far from that.
How much, like, how do you approach your first drafts then?
I would say wherever I left off in the previous book, in the first 3 or 4 books, I would repeat the last chapter from the previous book to settle a reader who had not read the book. And here you are in book 3, what happened in book 2 is very necessary. So I would repeat the last chapter so they know what's going on. And to answer your question, I would take whatever was going on wherever I cut it off. There's something up in the air. There's something really serious going on. And I just start in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the book that I'm doing right now, book 6, is the exception. I've stopped repeating and I built into it what was going on. And I'm going to be talking with Joseph, my editor, as to is that the best. I'm like probably 75% thinking it's a good idea the way you did it. But that brings up the question of how much do you hold a reader's hand that has not read the previous books?
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that as a reader, I always appreciated when it was kind of woven in, but like very obvious in that first chapter if I happened to be in the middle of a series, which happened to me a lot by accident in my life. But I think that first chapter idea is fascinating too. I hadn't heard of someone doing that before.
I got complaints. There are readers on reviews who do not like cliffhangers. When they get to the end of that book, they want it wrapped up with a bow on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to happen in anything I'm doing. I try to make it plain it's not happening. But there are people that do not appreciate being left hanging. Okay. To be continued doesn't work with them. And I know exactly what you're talking about too. But in my case, it's the drama itself has reached a point where I think it needs to stop and we'll start again. Repeating that last chapter is my way of doing it. Now that I've tried to woven it in, like a lot of people try to do, I have had to cut out stuff. Going, well, now I repeated that twice. Okay, I've got to stop repeating it to the point where do you stop holding the hand? Where do you think that they can find the summary? I don't know.
That's the struggle of being a series author for sure, is trying to figure that part out.
I've actually got to the point where I've typed up a bulleted synopsis of all the books to give to people that are doing reviews for me so that they know where they're at, and they don't have to wonder what's going on.
That is really smart. And I know that as someone, because on this show, I used to every single episode I read the book that the author wrote, and I loved it. And I read so many incredible books, and I wish I had the time to keep doing that. But it got to be too much at a certain point where I was like, oh no, I physically can't read all of these. But I would have loved having like a little bullet point thing that said, this is where you are in the series. Because when you're doing that, you don't really have time to read all of the other books.
That's why the main character's missing his arm. The book 2 it got chopped off. Something like that. So.
For sure. Well, I have had a really incredible time talking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Same here. Yes, thank you, and same here. It's been interesting.
Thank you. I just have one last question, and that's, what do you have coming up?
Book 6. Okay. Book 4 just came out. Book 5 will be January. Book 6, I'm hoping to turn in. I should have turned it in already, real soon. Okay. And in book 5 is the one that was the really big one I was mentioning. Mm-hmm. Celwyn and company are chasing a boat full of pirates from England all the way to Singapore and beyond. And along the way, a lot happens. Something happens that is pretty horrible after Singapore too. And then in book 6, that's where I will weave in what's going on. Book 6 that I'm right now, they're heading back toward England, but that's not really their destination. They're going to Prague to a funeral of one of the main players.
Oh,
who was murdered because of them.
Interesting.
That's what's going on. But I'll leave it at that. All
right. Well, I am really excited. I want to read all of these books. I hope anyone listening to this will check out the whole series and all of your other short stories and all of your amazing writing. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Lou Kemp.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after, the end.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.